Of the 11 super rookies up to the point of Egghead, most of their abilities have been revealed, at least those ones, Devil Fruits that is. The only ones left are Juri, Bonnie, and Rouge. We'll be covering Juri Bonnie today. What I find so interesting about her is that over the years I've heard many a theory about what her Devil Fruit might be. One interesting theory that I have come across fairly recently is a video by fellow content creator Threevil, in which he goes over how he thinks Bonnie has the Time Fruit, or the Toki Toki no Mi. I think that's a very good theory, and I think you should go check him out because I think he does have a good point. However, I will be stating what I think in this video, which does act as a bit of a counterpoint to the evidence that he presented in his video. So, does Juri Bonnie have the Time Fruit? I don't think so. In One Piece, even though many Devil Fruits have varying applications, there are some that only have basically one power. Based on Toki's part in the story and how she performs, she kind of is a more of a narrative driven character. So she was meant to pop out of nowhere from 20 years in the past and then to send Kinemon and the boys 20 years into the future. She doesn't display any other power besides that, sending herself into the future or sending others into the future. Now, are there any other Devil Fruits like that? Well, yeah, kinda. You have Devil Fruits like, say, the Hobby Fruit. The Hobby Fruit simply turns people into toys. It does affect the user and makes them young, which I guess I wouldn't really call that a power. That's sort of like a negative or a side effect to the ability. But the ability itself, in terms of application, really only does one thing. You can add conditions onto the afflicted person to make them more obedient, but for all intents and purposes, it's still one power, and it's still doing one thing, which is to turn all living things into toys upon touch. Then you have the Jacket Fruit. The Jacket Fruit, eaten by Kelly Funk, really does one thing. It turns Kelly Funk into a jacket, and then if and only if something living wears him, he can then possess the body of that living thing and borrow their offensive capabilities. So their muscular defensive bodies, the overwhelming strength that the user or the wearer might have, etc., etc. But that's still basically one thing as far as I can see. But with Bonnie has displayed kind of multiple abilities at this point. She can age and corrode objects, which is a completely different thing than when she ages people. And we see this in her first showing at Shabani Archipelago, where she turns all the Marines into babies and old men, whereas their clothes and guns remained untouched. Then in Egghead, she aged the lock that held the room that contained Kuma's memories closed, so she can affect objects. Also, what was really interesting about her is that she can pull various forms into the present from a person's timeline or possible timeline. She does this with Luffy. She does this with herself because she makes herself muscular, which is a form we had not seen up to this point. And then she turns Luffy into a 70-year-old man, which in the text box, it reads, she pulled in a possible future, which is referencing the funny SBS what if questions, and when the various Straw Hats and other popular characters are set in both a good and bad timeline, and it shows them going from, I believe, age 40 to like age 60. So that is a reference to that. So we actually get an SBS situation made canon in the manga, which has been happening a lot recently. So just from those, also I should mention, she does this super weird thing to Vegapunk in which she knocks the age out of Vegapunk, making her power very interestingly similar to that of her father Kuma, because Kuma too could push things that don't necessarily exist and make them tangible matter. Bonnie does this. She pushes the age out of Vegapunk and his age turns into like these weird jewel bit like candies, which is very funny because it's of her namesake, Jewelry Bonnie. Jewelry Bonnie turned Vegapunk's age into jewels. So I just find that a very interesting name comparison there. But the point is that these are like 3 different separate powers under the one umbrella of her ability. Therefore, I would say that her ability is probably the age fruit, because age doesn't necessarily reflect time. It's age in the way that, say, Shinobu ages things with her ripe fruit. It's not so much about changing the time of an individual. It's about changing where they are placed in time or at a time. It's not about traveling through time. It's about pulling out a possible situation from a possible timeline using the person as an anchor. So I think Bonnie has the age fruit, because you could say age could mean 1, to age an object, 2, a person aging, or 3, an age as in an era of time, which I think fits Bonnie's abilities quite nicely, because she's 1, pulling an age out of a person into the present age. You kind of follow me here? So she's pulling out an age in when Luffy is a 70-year-old man into the current age. So she's pulling an age into an age, if that makes sense. She's not making the person travel through time. She simply is pulling from a possibility in that person's life into the forefront. And then she can then reset them, of course, and turn them back to normal. She does this for herself as well. She can become a little girl, she can become a older woman, or she can become a muscular woman, which are all possible timelines for her, presumably. Now, as things have been presented in One Piece, and I'm going out on a limb here, just from the amount of fruits we've had for one concept versus the other, time seems to be a totally different thing from age, because franchise-wide now we have 3 different age fruits and 1 fruit specifically focused on time. So I'm starting to think Toki's fruit may stand alone in its ability, whereas Bonnie does have, you could say, Del Fruit sisters in the concepts of the other characters. So those characters being Shinobu, who is canon, who has the ripe fruit, and Ein from Film Z, who has the return fruit, or the back fruit. Ein can de-age people and objects 12 years, whereas Shinobu can mature people and objects to a undetermined point. I'm assuming 20 years, but that's kind of iffy. I'm just using Momonosuke as a metric, since she does change him from an 8-year-old to a 28-year-old. So yeah. But just based on these 3 and what we've seen from Del Fruit hierarchies before, Ani seems like she would be the superior person in this situation. Her supposed age fruit would be superior to the canon ripe fruit. There are situations in which you have supposedly weaker fruits who just have different abilities to their superior counterparts. Because with Ain's back fruit, she can actually kill people with it, which is something that Bonnie and Shinobu can't do, or at least haven't been seen doing. You see, when Ain's limit of 12 years passes the amount of years that the person has, they just expire. They turn into nothingness. So, have we seen these types of relationships before in other Del Fruits? Yes. You see, with the Kilo fruit and the Ton fruit, the Kilo fruit can do something that the Ton fruit cannot do, despite being supposedly weaker than it. The Kilo fruit can actually decrease the user's weight down to 1 kilogram, or increase the weight up to 10,000 kilograms, making them lighter than air. However, the Ton fruit can only increase the user's weight by the ton. So even though the Ton fruit is ultimately heavier than the Kilo fruit's max limit, the Kilo fruit still has an ability that the Ton fruit does not have. You see this too with the arms fruit versus the dice fruit, even though the arms fruit has a wide variety of weapons that it allows the user to turn into, in accordance to also being able to regenerate if that weapon happens to be explosive. The dice fruit, even though it makes its user essentially a sword person, the dice fruit can cut things effortlessly, even when they're not making an effort to. If they simply make contact with what they wish to cut, they'll simply cut it. And there have been situations in which Mr. One, the current user of the dice fruit, has actually just diced up whole buildings by simply using one attack, or simply crossing his arms. He's cut pillars into pizza-like sections. So he just specializes in cutting, whereas Baby 5, the current user of the arms fruit, is simply a arsenal of weapons. So the same logic applies here with, say, Bonnie versus Shinobu. Shinobu specializes in maturing things. However, she falls short to Bonnie. Though with Bonnie, from what we've seen, it seems as though Bonnie can only selectively age one thing at a time, because when she ages, say, the soldiers in Shabani Archipelago, she only ages the soldiers themselves. She doesn't age the clothing or the weapons. So I think with Bonnie, she can only age one type of target at a time, whereas Shinobu specializes in aging. So whatever she makes contact with and wills to age will simply age. Whereas Bonnie, even though she is more powerful than Shinobu and has more options, she has to pick and select the type of target that she wishes to affect. So if she wishes to age and de-age a person, she ages and de-ages a group of people. If she wishes to only target their weapons, she'll only target their weapons. So that's why I think the difference is with Bonnie versus Shinobu. Bonnie has to target what she wants to age or de-age, whereas Shinobu simply just ages everything. Another point where Shinobu succeeds where Bonnie does not is that anything Shinobu ages is permanently that age, is permanently aged or is permanently decayed. Whereas Bonnie at least can reverse the aging she's done to living things. So that's the difference here. In Sacrifice for Permanence, Bonnie has more options. In Sacrifice for Options, Shinobu's effects are permanent, and she cannot reverse them herself, thus giving Shinobu an advantage in the face of Bonnie's Menti advantages. Now, this next one's a bit weird since it happens in One Piece Stampede, the movie, but I thought I should mention it just in case it comes into play somewhere in the manga, as movies after Strong World get kind of weird, and movies before Strong World have been sampled for stuff that happens in the manga. Like I did a whole video on Robin's abilities and how the whole making bigger forms out of smaller constructs originated in a movie. So, talking about Stampede, here's what's so interesting about Bonnie in Stampede. When she fights Douglas Bullet, she has some eggs in her pocket, which is very interesting, seeing as how her most prominent arc so far has been the Egghead arc. But okay, whatever. She has some eggs in her pocket, and she ages those eggs up to the point that they hatch and turn to full-blown doves. Now, why is this interesting? This is alluding to her powers being able to give experience. So she's not only pulling the birds into a state in which they are fully grown, she's pulling them into a state of which they're fully grown and have the experience to fly like normal birds, which is interesting because does this extend to people? Could she say, if she was in the Wano arc instead of Shinobu, right? Could she age up Momo to a point in which he was on the same level in Delfruit prowess as Kaido? So like, say she pulls in a version of him into the present time in which he is fully adept in using all of his Delfruit powers, and he doesn't need to learn or go through anything. He can just go and use Blast Breath and use all these same techniques that Kaido can use because he's had 20 years of experience with that fruit because of her abilities. Maybe Maybe. We don't know how far this goes, but I felt the need to bring it up because this is something that hasn't really been touched upon yet, but based on her prominence in this arc, it may come to fruition in the future. Now, based on what has happened in 1089, we now confirm that she does indeed have some sort of relationship with the five elders. So I think what this relationship might be, and the reason why she might have been replaced, is that they have found another way to prolong their life. Because I think another ability that she might have is that she can keep a individual fixed in a time in their life for an undetermined amount of time. So let's say you will remain as you are now at, say, age 89 or 47 for this amount of time. So I guess you could say it's like setting an egg timer on a person. And then when that egg timer is up, they will begin to start aging naturally. So she has to be brought in again to do a reset on the timer. That's a bit of an out there idea, but I think that may be why she was useful. Now, the alternative to her, this is going way out into the reeds, but follow me. What if the alternative is just S Leopard or Seraphim Trafalgar D Waterlaw? Because here's the thing, Buggy and Law were kind of alluded to being warlords at the very end of the pre-time skip. So most likely they were warlords, say, before Weevil, for example. So I could see them being used in the Seraphim project because they were warlords for basically the full 2 years and some change, right? So with that being said, I could see them using multiple Seraphim laws, and then each one performs the eternal life surgery on the five elders. And then since they're expendable, one dies, bring the next one in. One dies, bring the next one in, until all five have eternal life. So that fixes that. And I would assume that the Opie no Mi, or the Op fruit, can be copied, seeing as how presumably the Shadow fruit has been copied, and the Shadow fruit is as ridiculous in its weird reality bending properties as the Op fruit is. So if that can be copied, then the Op fruit can be copied. So that must be the alternative to Bonnie. Several little law batteries that can give each of the five elders eternal life. Another thing to think about is the awakening of this fruit. Now we're going to borrow from a movie again. We're going to look at film Z again with Ein. Ein had a death clause attached to her Del fruit, meaning if she aged something that didn't have 12 years to give, then they would simply blink out of existence. So if she de-aged something by 12 years and the person was like 6 years old, they would simply cease to exist. So what if Bonnie could do this? What if Bonnie could push an individual to a point of non-existence or death? So she de-ages them to a point in which they can't theoretically exist anymore, or she pushes someone to a point in which they're on their deathbed because they've been aged so severely. That's an idea for her awakening. I'm sure there are other avenues we can go down. Maybe pushing more jewels out of a person to the point where they reach one of those endpoints. Not sure, but that's all I have for you today. Give me your thoughts. If you like stuff like this, please feel free to check out my YouTube channel, P Works. And if you like what you see, I would appreciate your subscription. Thank you so much. See you next time.